The president's tweets attacking the mayor of London, in a way, taking the mayor's comments completely out of context. I mean, he was wrong about what he claimed the mayor said. How do you do that on the day where there's been a terror attack against our greatest ally?
When I first saw that tweet, and I understand people are saying that they're misinterpreting or that he's misrepresenting, et cetera. Having seen enough out of the mayor of London, period, just in general, I really do think that this is, I mean, my first reaction was he's Neville Chamberlain as mayor of London, and that Trump, in his own fashion, not consciously being Churchillian, but is basically saying, you guys have got to toughen up here. The notion that flooding the zone with, what, 1,000 police or whatever is not in response to terrorism, I mean, and is not alarming.
You think the president, you're saying that the president wasn't being consciously Churchillian. We mean you believe his tweet was actually like Churchill would have done?
I have even pulled up a direct quote from Winston Churchill. He talked about the weakness of the virtuous and talking about...
But does he misquote people? Did Churchill misquote people? But he is misquoting what the mayor said, and he's blasting him for something that the mayor did not say.
But the mayor, in reading his tweet, the mayor was talking about flooding the zone, as it were, with 1,000 cops. Was that in essence
right? And that's that sounds never like Neville Chamberlain.
Well, I mean, why do you have to do that in the first place?
Well,
you have to do that because you're not taking care of the terrorism, right?
So when there's any terrorism attack in the United States, that's because the president is not taking care of, or the mayor of the city is not taking care of.
That we need to do a better job. That's exactly correct. Whether it's London, Washington, or anywhere else.
But when a nation is grieving and people have been killed, is it really? I'm just in basic common human decency. Isn't it just sleazy to do this?
I just think that the president thinks that the world is more or less asleep on this, and they're not doing enough, and that they need some sort of, if you will, shock therapy to awaken to it. I mean, I don't think there's anything malicious about it. I just think that's his belief here.
I disagree there. I actually think there is some malicious intent here. So it's not just showing a lack of fundamental human decency. It's not just a failure to show solidarity with a key United States ally. There's also a troubling pattern here. The president likes to pick on people of color and set them up as foils. If you think of the people he sets out and embarks on Twitter wars with, you have Mayor Khan, you have Khizr Khan, you have Judge Curiel. He likes these foils that set up a narrative that caters to a certain element in his base that he likes to send dog whistle signals to. And that's a very detestable aspect of what he does.
I mean, Jeff, would you defend it? I mean, why not then defend it? Say, what if he had tweeted against Ariana Grande for not providing enough security at her venue? I mean, would that be fair too?
I mean, what he's trying
that would be okay.
Sure. I mean, what you're trying to illustrate is there is a serious problem here. And we have collectively in this world not taken this serious enough, and people are getting killed for it.
That would be news to a lot of Brits who have been dealing with a terrorism problem much longer, domestic terrorism much longer than the United States has. They have laws that would horrify civil libertarians here in the UK in terms of how you can detain suspects.
They have cameras everywhere.
They have cameras everywhere. I mean, some Brits come over here and say, you guys aren't taking terrorism seriously. You should come back and see what we did when we were under threat from the IRA. They have a long history, Jeffrey, of dealing with this terrorism problem. And to just single out the mayor of the most important city of our most important ally after a terrorist attack?
It's like attacking the saying, keep calm and carry on. It's like, why not go after that? Why not, go after that and say, how dare they keep calm? We should be hysterical.
Blaming the victim of the attack, essentially. Blaming the people of London rather than the attackers. That's what's going on here, Jeffrey. Neville Chamberlain caved into Hitler and gave him an incentive to invade Europe. This is a mayor who is saying he's flooding the city with security forces. Don't be alarmed at the security forces because they're there to protect you. He was not saying don't be alarmed about the terrorists.
But the need to have them there in the first place.
So let me understand. So if the British Prime Minister had gone after the mayor of Orlando in the wake of the Orlando killings, you would have been fine with that?
If the people in Orlando weren't getting their job done, if the American government wasn't getting its job done. Sure.
So yes, that would be fine.
Anderson, we're allies, right?
Okay.
This is a family conversation.
After 9/11, if the Prime Minister of Pakistan had attacked the United States for not protecting the citizens of the United States. That would have been fine. Rudy Giuliani. So the Prime Minister of Pakistan had attacked Rudy Giuliani for not providing safety for the people of New York City. That would be fine with you.
How many decades into this
problem? You can't say that would be fine with you. Okay, but that would be fine.
Yes, Anderson.
So Rudy Giuliani failed to provide security for the people of New York City.
Anderson, I believe I was on your show during the primaries when I said.
Okay, but you're saying Rudy Giuliani failed to provide.
Criticism of George W. Bush for not protecting America was valid because you're on that
watch. So
right
now, tonight, you were saying Rudy Giuliani failed to provide enough security for the people of New York City on 9/11.
I'm sure Rudy Giuliani doesn't think it's enough, right?
Okay.
I mean, there was an attack. The whole point is...
But is Rudy Giuliani to blame? You think Rudy Giuliani believes he's to blame?
Anderson, the buck stops here, as Harry Truman said. If you're in charge, mayor, governor, president, prime minister, yes, you are in charge.
Right.
And the president was so distressed by this lack of seriousness that came after this attack that he went out and played golf with Peyton Manning and Bob Corker on the day that he issued these tweets. I'm not one to criticize presidents for playing golf, but you can't on the one hand go out and suggest that there's a cavalier nature being shown by the mayor of London. And Trump, the irony with the Trump administration officials today going out and trying to poo-poo Twitter and suggest that you shouldn't pay attention to the president's tweeting is, from all visible outward appearances, that's all he's done in the last 48 hours in response to the attacks on London.
All visible. We don't know what he's done.
Yeah, what's he been up to?
Well, he watches a lot of TV. Right. You got to admit, he watches more TV than any president
in history.
In history,
Lyndon
probably.
Johnson was pretty good at it. He had a 3-tiered television set, right?
Okay, yeah, but there wasn't cable news back then, so clearly Donald Trump watches much more television than any president.
Okay,
so couldn't you make the argument that there may be more important things for the President of the United States? I mean, you know, I love cable news, but for the President of the United States to be doing than watching the morning shows and tweeting about what he's watching in the morning shows?
Anderson, I don't doubt for a second that the message he's giving to his government is take care of business. I don't doubt that for a second.
Okay. Well, his government's pretty small because they just haven't hired a lot of people. There's a lot of people who haven't been confirmed. There's a lot of people who
he didn't even show enough curiosity about the fundamental facts at issue in the attack to gather the intelligence that is uniquely available to him as the President of the United States and issue a coherent, informative statements that news outlets like CNN and NBC News could rely on. In fact, outlets like NBC and AP had to put out advisories warning that they were not taking the President's tweeting at face value because they couldn't rely on the information.